Babe, hold my beer.
You don't drink beer.
That's not the point! A quick overview if you don't know how this build works. Basically, we're using the Chronomancer Ascendancy to get cooldown reduction, a chance to not use our cooldowns, and also an ability that allows us to reset our cooldowns. We're moving from the Chronomancer side of the tree, and we're scaling block, area of effect, melee damage, and working our way all the way down to get Giant's Blood, so we can use a two-hander with a shield, more cooldown, more damage, attack speed, and block. This build's really powerful because the Hammer of the Gods has a massive amount of damage. You can see here that has an attack damage of 4,469%, which is crazy, and a massive AoE with the ability to reset it as much as we need to. As you can see from the start of the video, there are some people that want to have a more dedicated hammer build instead of leaping and bone shattering enemies. And this is actually the way I intended the build when I first thought of it. But unfortunately, I realized that with the leap slam and bone shatter, I was clearing faster. But in order to compensate for that in this version of the build, I put more attack speed, I reduced the drop time for the hammer, and we're able to do that because we have two different hammers on the build. So this is kind of ridiculous. I went ahead and wasted all the money I had in the game in order to make another hammer that actually had the extra sockets. I didn't even have the martial tempo in there when I was recording the gameplay for this video. But as you can see, very quickly I can drop the hammer, and very quickly I can reset the hammer, and we can spam like crazy with huge AoE. And you do end up with a cooldown eventually, but for one, when you're moving between packs of enemies, that cooldown's gonna naturally kind of fix itself. But also, in order to compensate for the change in gameplay style, I went ahead and threw on the Crest of Ardura for this one. And this is a very cheap shield, much cheaper than the shield I have in the more endgame focused version of the build. This one still actually works really well in the endgame though, because the gameplay for this, I cleared in a tier 15 map. I had it fully decked out with all of the rare mods, so, you know, negative stuff to make the enemies harder, all that fun stuff. So this still works perfectly fine for the endgame. And if you prefer more of a hammer spammer build, this is actually a little bit safer because you can stay back and you don't have to actually dive into enemies. Because if I die, I usually die from jumping into something where maybe enemies had an AoE circle on them that was about to pop and I jumped in like an idiot. So this will help with that type of thing. I did drop a little bit of survivability in order to do this, but I could probably fix that over time by optimizing around it, but I kind of just did the quick and rough version. But as you can see here, we have Magnified Effect for more AoE, Fist of War for more AoE and damage, Fast Forward to make the hammer drop faster, Tremors to get those aftershocks, because when you're doing that massive AoE and you get the aftershocks, you can kind of just lead enemies into the circle of AoE and it's kind of funny. Martial Tempo to be able to cast it faster. I pulled this out of Leap Slam, as you can see. For the other hammer, I've got Momentum, and this is gonna actually increase your damage by 40% when you're moving with the hammer. And honestly, maybe this would be better in the AoE hammer because you tend to be moving while you're doing this naturally, whereas on a boss, which is what you'd use this top one for, maybe you wouldn't be moving as much, so that's something to play around with. Concentrated effect for bosses because you just need to hit one little area. And because we have more AoE in this build, it's actually easier to land this regardless. Heavy Swing for more damage, Heft for more damage, and Brutality for more damage. I think in this version of the build, I would probably focus specifically on the bleed, if anything, and not worry about the poison aspect of it, because we get a lot more damage in it. You can actually see that I'm at 200,000 DPS here, which is about double of what my other one was. In fact, it's making me consider how I want to actually go towards my damage in the other build. This number is not perfect because it doesn't include everything. For example, we've got 57,000 here. If I pull out Fist of War, it doesn't change at all, even though that's a 20% damage multiplier. So it's not a perfect representation, so you gotta, you know, be careful with that. But I do think that putting points into more increased damage may have actually been more beneficial than the extra random stuff that I was doing before. So that's something I'm gonna play with. We still have the Leaf Slam and Bone Shatter combo if we do run out of cooldowns and need to do something. And this still works fine. We've got Seismic Cry, which I actually didn't use during the gameplay that I recorded for this video. But this can buff your hammers like crazy. And this is definitely worth using on bosses, if nothing else. Or right before you trigger an Essence mob, something like that. So that's something to keep in mind. Ancestral Warrior Totem you can drop for bosses as well, and that's going to help keep your rage up. I've got Berserk, Time of Need, and Scavenged Plating right now. I do think that I would prefer to have Herald of Ash on this instead of the Scavenged Plating. I had the Scavenged Plating here more for my previous version of the build and forgot to put it back on when I was recording the gameplay, but I think Herald of Ash is going to be better because it's going to make you do even more AoE. Let's look at the passive tree real quick. So in the passive tree, I mostly just did some changes. You can see I already had attack speed on the search there. I went for more attack speed in different places. So we've got some here, got some here. I got more AoE and AoE damage here. I went for the 40% increased aftershock area of effect. You'll notice in the gameplay that when aftershocks happen, it'll start killing enemies even further out from the massive circle, so that's really cool. I maintained the bleed here, and we could throw in some of the jagged ground in this because we can afford to drop a little bit of the damage on the bigger hammer, so you could make a jagged ground there if you wanted to. Yeah, just more AoE, more attack speed, and I ended up going up here and grabbing the cooldown and area of effect. This is probably not something I would keep here, or if I did keep this, then my amulet would end up having a different effect on it, and I would use this for something else, like probably the near at hand, which would make the hammer drop even faster. So yeah, I'm not too sure about this whole line or how I'd want to play that there, but like I said, I was doing a kind of loose and fast version of this because I just wanted to do something fun and put it out for you guys in case you're interested in a little bit different take on the hammer spammer. This is much more of a hammer spammer setup. And for the gear, I didn't really change much here. Like I said, I did the shield change, which is pretty easy to swap over between this and the other one I was using because they're both unique and don't have resistances or much that you have to worry about, so pretty easy change there. We still have a big focus on physical damage because that's how we scale this build. It's going to scale both our hits as well as the bleed that comes from the hits, so just maintain the physical damage. For the jewels on this one, I think that you would focus mostly on red or ruby, and you'd go for chance to block, rage on melee hit, and chance to inflict bleeding would probably be the main ones. Increased armor or any type of applicable damage would be perfectly fine. And something I started using in my other version of the build is Resolute Technique because I got tired of my Bone Shatter not hitting for whatever reason, even though I had 100% accuracy. So this one I would recommend taking out if you're doing this version of the build because the hammer cannot miss. So there's no point in having this. You may as well get your critical hits back. The Chronomancer Ascendancy stuff should stay the same. I don't think you need anything different. So I'm probably going to play around with this version of the build on stream today, and maybe a little bit further than that, depending on if I decide I like it more, like it less. We'll see what happens. But either way, this is a nice alternate version for people that want it. Make sure you come by the stream at twitch.tv/screamheart, and we'll develop this a little bit further. And we'll figure out what we decide on the sweet spot between this and the previous versions of the build are. I think after this one, I'm going to put out a final version of the build, and then I'm probably going to move on to my next build. So make sure you guys leave a comment and let me know what other builds you want me to try. But I'm probably going to do something pretty weird, so be prepared. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video.